All right, let's talk about something that pretty much every parent and educator wrestles with. When is the right time for a kid to start school? I mean, it sounds simple enough, right? But with policies all over the world starting to push for earlier and earlier start times, this whole debate is really heating up.
So let's just get right to the heart of it. The whole conversation boils down to this one question. Is a child ready? But what does ready even mean? Is it just about turning 5, or is it something more? Because, getting this wrong isn't a small mistake. It could be the difference between giving a child a huge head start or setting them up for a real struggle from day one.
Okay, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to look at why this whole thing isn't exactly an even playing field for every kid. Then, we'll dig into the numbers, what actually happens to grades and achievement gaps. After that, we'll uncover some pretty surprising long-term ripple effects. And finally, we're going to piece it all together and figure out what it actually takes to make this work. First things first, let's talk about fairness, equity, because a big policy change like this doesn't affect every child in the same way, not even close. Depending on a kid's background and their support system at home, the impact can be wildly different. And this right here is a huge piece to the puzzle. A 2024 study by Yaffe points out something that feels like common sense, but we often forget about it in these policy debates. What happens at home is absolutely critical. A parent's involvement, the whole home environment, it plays a massive role in how a young kid handles the shock of starting school.
And this really shows you the two sides of the coin. For kids from supportive homes, with lots of resources and attention, starting school early can be an amazing opportunity. But for children from disadvantaged households, that same policy can actually make existing challenges even bigger. It can widen that achievement gap before they've even had a chance to get started.
And it gets even more complicated. The research highlights some really serious risks. For example, did you know the youngest kids in any given classroom are way more likely to be misdiagnosed as needing special education? And for kids who are already dealing with emotional or behavioral stuff, throwing them into school early without the right support can be, well, a disaster. It's a huge reminder that a one-size-fits-all approach is a really risky game to play with a child's future.
Okay, so we've talked about the social and emotional side of things. Now let's switch gears and look at the academics. What does the hard data say? How does starting school earlier actually affect things like grades and test scores?
So, before we jump into the numbers, we got to get our heads around this key idea, developmental readiness. And just to be clear, this isn't about whether a kid knows their ABCs. It's about their emotional toolkit. Do they have the maturity, the ability to handle frustration? Can they manage the social pressures of a classroom? That's what readiness really is.
And this is where it gets super interesting, because the research is all over the place. On one hand, you've got studies that are basically screaming, hold on, they warn that younger kids just aren't mature enough and their grades suffer right from the start. But then, you've got other really solid research showing that waiting, actually raising the starting age, can lead to better grades and even fewer kids dropping out later on. So yeah, there's absolutely no easy answer here.
But you know what? This whole thing goes so much deeper than just report cards. The age a kid starts school can create these ripple effects that, believe it or not, can shape their entire life in ways you'd never expect.
This is where the story gets really wild. The research connects a child's school starting age to, well, almost everything. I mean, sure, better school retention, that makes sense, but it also seems to influence major life decisions, like when people decide to start a family, which then can actually impact a country's entire fertility rate. Just think about that for a second. A single policy decision, and the echoes are felt through a person's whole life and across an entire society.
So with all these complex issues and pretty serious risks, how can a policy of starting school earlier ever actually work? Let's stop talking about the problems for a minute and focus on the solutions.
If there is one thing you take away from all this, please let it be this. The policy itself is not some kind of magic wand. It's just an idea on paper. Whether it succeeds or fails comes down entirely to the support systems we build around it.
So what does a good support system actually look like? Well, the research points to a pretty clear three-part plan. First, you have to completely adapt the curriculum. You can't just give a 5-year-old a watered-down version of what 6-year-olds are doing. Second, you have to train the teachers. They need very specific skills to work with this unique age group. And third, we can use technology to create personalized learning paths, so we're meeting every single kid right where they are.
But the research also waves some massive red flags for the people making these decisions. Look, without real money behind it, this is just an empty promise. And you absolutely have to deal with the huge gap in resources between, say, a school in the city and one out in a rural area.
Because if you rush this without a solid, thoughtful plan, it doesn't just fail, it actually risks making the inequalities we already have even worse.
So when you boil it all down, the real takeaway is this. We've been so focused on the wrong question. This debate shouldn't just be about the age, it has to be about the system. Success isn't found in the policy itself, it's found in the preparation, the careful, well-funded, and fair preparation that has to happen first.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. Maybe we've been having the wrong conversation this entire time. Instead of asking if our kids are ready for school, shouldn't we be asking if our schools are truly ready for our kids? Thanks for joining us.